Hello, and welcome to week 9 of American History Hybrid. This week we're going to take a look at President Nixon's presidency through Jimmy Carter's presidency. And the president that falls in between will be the only president that was not elected in American history, and that would be Gerald Ford. This week, your learning objectives are as follows. You will recite President Nixon's policy and how it's different than Lyndon B. Johnson's and John F. Kennedy's policies, describe how Nixon responded to economic issues, especially during the economic crisis of the early 1970s, identify the causes and effects of energy crises in the early 1970s, specifically 73, and then again we'll take a look at energy crises on Jimmy Carter's watch in the late 70s, and summarize the issues surrounding the Watergate scandal under President Nixon's presidency, explain how Jimmy Carter was a different kind of president than the previous presidents in American history, describe the effects of the Iranian hostage crisis. We'll catch a glimpse at this objective, but we'll talk more about it next week as well. Construct the policies of both Carter and Nixon, as well as Lyndon B. Johnson. Describe how American families' lives had changed during the 1970s, list the different forms of entertainment that were popular in the 70s, and then analyzing how technology affected American lives. Starting off, the Nixon years. Country was suffering from stagflation. Again, an economic condition where there's a combination of rising unemployment and a rise in inflation. The Vietnam War was one of the causes to this, and that was, again, the money that was pumped in to fund the war had put the country in debt. And then in 1973, we see OPEC again. OPEC is an oil exporting countries, oil petroleum exporting countries that was established in 1960, and in 73 they created an embargo on the U.S., and that embargo imposed in 73, and then the embargo caused a rise in oil prices, so many gas hikes took place, and we look at examples of cars in long lines waiting in some cases hours to fill gas tanks. And then the embargo is lifted in 74, but the gas is still high and economic conditions do not improve. Nixon's legislation, he passes several acts. The first of which is the Environmental Protection Agency, again a government regulating the conservation of our environment. Next, he talks about energy conservation, he is going to sign a bill that reduces the highway speed limit to 55 miles per gallon, and thereby saving what Holt says is $3.4 billion of gas per year. He also calls for a Clean Air Act, which improves the overall quality of breathable air, and he also imposes a quality improvement, Water and Quality Improvement Act, again putting regulations on clean drinking water, and then also regulations on big businesses and their standards for emissions, specifically like automobile companies with large oil spills. And then we'll also see addressing the Endangered Species Act, so care for natural environment again. Foreign policy, he's going to call for a policy that's called realpolitik. Realpolitik is moving away from the animosity of the ideologies and looking to focus on national interest between both countries. And again, this is a policy that is working with both China, where again Nixon will be the first to visit China since the spread of communism in 1949, and you also have the realpolitik with the other superpower during this time, that being USSR, and the leader at the time, Nikita Khrushchev. 72, again, he'll visit both countries, also known as a period of détente. Détente is a period of lessening military and political tensions. That détente will continue throughout President Nixon's reign as president, and then in Gerald Ford, we'll see the détente really end with Carter when he takes president in 1979 when the Soviets decide to invade Afghanistan. Foreign policy also, Nixon will send in the CIA to topple accused communist leader Salvador Allende, and again he'll be despotted, where he'll be replaced by a democratic leader. The incident that plagues President Nixon is the Watergate scandal. I'm going to go quickly through this because, again, some of this will be on the test, but not a lot of it. But this just gives you in-depth information. Again, the Watergate scandal is, again, looking at President Nixon's involvement with the Democratic National Convention in his 72 election. Did the president cover up? Do you think it's necessary for presidential nominees to reveal all contributions to campaigns? And a video that we're not going to take a look at. All right, first off, Nixon was known as a young senator from California. Remember, he began his he was a senator in the 1950s. He ran against John F. Kennedy, and remember why he lost against John F. Kennedy? Because of his image on the media, being one of insecure or nervous. Nixon, so in '72, he's accused of hiring affiliates that wiretapped, burglarized, and manipulated presidential proceedings, or the Democratic National Committee in the Watergate Hotel. The scandal happened in '72. 5 men broke in. They're accused of, among them was possession of 2,000 bills. The 5 men that broke in, and again, a member of the committee, Gordon Liddy, and Howard Hunt, and both Howard and Liddy were both jailed. Others involved, there were reporters, Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodard. They discovered that there was laundered money from big businesses, and this money was known as slush fund, or kept a slush fund. So clear evidence here of possible Nixon involvement. And there's also the idea of the concept of deep throat. During this time, deep throat was not known. However, most recently there was evidence that it was discovered who Deep Throat was. But again, Deep Throat was an anonymous informant. And then we see the trials. Trials will continue, and they'll continue. And the role of John Dean and John Ehrlichman is sentenced. Again, the tapes of the actual break-in, there's evidence that 8.5 minutes, or there was material removed from the tape. And the verdicts, there were pleas. You see the men that were charged, and then the grand jury names Nixon as an undictated co-conspirator in the plot to obstruct justice. So again, he's not found in violation of Watergate, but he's obstructing justice by not revealing information that he was supposedly aware of. So in '74, he resigns instead of being impeached, and he'll be the first president to resign in American history. When Gerald Ford takes office, he will pardon Nixon from all illegal activities associated with Watergate, which again demonstrates Gerald Ford's ineptness in sufficing with what the public wants. All right, taking a look at Carter, the outsider. Again, a different president during the 1970s. First, he tried to promise not to lie or mislead the American people like his predecessor did. Again, Richard Nixon. He again endured another energy crisis. Again, another oil energy crisis. We'll see him create the Department of Energy, regulating depletion of energy during this time. And we'll also see an economic recession. And again, that economic recession will continue during Carter's reign, and it will really hit its height in 1979 when we see the removal of the Shah and the Iranian hostage crisis. And many Americans lost their confidence in Carter. Foreign policy, slightly different than his predecessors again. He called for universal human rights. He wanted to negotiate with other countries, and he wanted to place economic sanctions or pressures on countries that violated human rights. Again, the détente that was started by Nixon, again, thawing the relation of the Cold War with China and the Soviet Union had failed because, again, Soviets' invasion of Afghanistan and the United States backs the opposition of the Soviet Union's the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen eventually stave off the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union never conquers Afghanistan, but nonetheless this will end the detente. And Camp David Accords, again, his dealings with the Middle East conflict, specifically with Anwar Sadat, the leader of Egypt, and the leader of Israel, Menachem Begin. And again, they'll come to an agreement to end the war. And moving on to 1970s. In 1970s, we're talking about life-changing, changing population. Latin American, Asian immigrants will be the mass immigrants that come to the United States. We'll see the interregional migration of Sunbelt states, specifically Arizona and California, Florida and Texas. We'll see more rights given to bilingual as well as disability rights, and we'll see again the deterioration of marriage, leading to higher divorce rates. We'll hold quotes the divorce rate being a little above 22.5% during the late 1970s. We'll also see movements towards selfishness, some will say, during this time, where we see the importance of I, where people begin to improve themselves. They see this through various forms of exercise. Yoga becomes popular. We see the balance of both mental and physical health during this time. We see the growth of the space program. When we talk about the space program, we're talking about 1969 Apollo 11, which will land Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon. And then in 72 Apollo 13 will start, and then we'll establish the Sky Lab in 1973. Movies will become a new wave of movies, starting with Steven Spielberg's movie in the late 1970s, where he's now he publishes a movie called Close Encounters of a Third Kind in 1977. Then he'll produce his famous movie E.T., which is extraterrestrial, in 82, and that will lead to other productions such as Jurassic Park in 93. Music will again be transformed in the 70s. We see the rise of the disco era. Disco era lived a short life during the 70s, and as well as we see the growth of punk rock. Really what we see is the invasion of the Beatles in the 60s, the breakup of the Beatles in the 70s, and that's going to lead to the popularity of disco music. Most discotheques were patrons that danced to record music instead of live bands. They also had a distinct fashion. That's where the bell-bottoms come in during this time. And again, we look at punk rock, such notable people as Lou Reed, Patti Smith, and the Ramones. And now we start to see popular culture as being global. It affects countries worldwide. Please review the learning objectives for the week. And once again, this concludes week number 9.